The body hit the floor like a thunderclap. 6 feet of muscle, crumpling between racks of guitars and pawn jewelry. Blood drained from his face as customers scattered, screaming. Sarah Mitchell didn't think. She dropped to her knees, ripped open his shirt, and locked her fingers over his sternum. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Repeat. The shop owner shouted at her to stop, that she'd get sued, that this wasn't her problem. But Sarah kept going, because that's what nurses do. 24 hours later, she'd be jobless, broke, and facing the biggest shock of her life. If you want to see how far courage can take you, and how justice finds those who deserve it, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The fluorescent lights of Mercy Ridge Medical Center hummed with the same tired frequency as Sarah Mitchell's pulse. 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and she was finally peeling off her latex gloves after a 14-hour shift that had stretched her nerves to breaking. 29 years old, 5 years of emergency nursing, and she still felt like an imposter sometimes. Tonight had been chest pains, a motorcycle accident, and a kid who'd swallowed half a bottle of his grandmother's pills. All of them went home breathing. All of them would forget her name by morning. Sarah changed out of her scrubs in the staff locker room, pulling on jeans and a gray hoodie. Her badge still hung from a lanyard around her neck out of habit. The hospital had been her entire world since nursing school. A concrete fortress in the heart of Ridgemont City, where Lake Michigan wind cut through the streets like broken glass. A text from her landlord. Rent's due tomorrow, no exceptions this time. Sarah closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. Money was always tight. Her mother's medical bills from the cancer treatment 2 years ago had left a crater in her finances she was still climbing out of. The apartment in Brookdale wasn't much, a 1-bedroom with thin walls and a radiator that clanked like a ghost in chains. But it was hers, and she was 3 months behind. That's why she was heading to Peterson's Pawn and Trade at midnight instead of collapsing into bed. The shop sat on the corner of Fletcher and 9th, sandwiched between a closed diner and a check-cashing place with bars on the windows. Sarah had been avoiding this errand for weeks, but she was out of options. Her father's watch, a 1960s Omega Seamaster he'd worn every day until the heart attack took him when she was 16, was the last thing of value she owned. She'd pawned it 4 months ago for $600 to cover a brutal utility bill. Tonight, she had $700 in an envelope, scraped together from every extra shift she could pick up. She was buying it back. The street was nearly empty. A few cars drifted past, headlights cutting through the November cold. Sarah pushed through the door of Peterson's, and a bell chimed overhead. The interior smelled like dust, old leather, and desperation. The particular perfume of objects people surrendered when they ran out of choices. Behind the counter stood Warren Peterson, the owner, a man in his 50s, with thinning hair and a permanent expression of suspicion. He looked up from a battered laptop and didn't smile. "We're closing," he said flatly. "I called earlier," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "About the Omega. I'm here to get it back." Warren's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he nodded and disappeared into the back room. Sarah waited, hands in her pockets, surrounded by guitars hanging on walls, glass cases full of rings and watches, shelves stacked with electronics that had outlived their owner's patience. The door chimed again. A man walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-30s, wearing a faded army-issue jacket and cargo pants. His face was hard-angled and weathered, the kind of face that had seen things and decided not to talk about them. Dark hair cropped military short. He moved with the controlled economy of someone trained to be efficient. He didn't look at Sarah, just walked past her, toward a display of knives in a locked case near the back. Warren returned, holding a small box. He set it on the counter and opened it without ceremony. Inside, The Omega gleamed under the overhead lights, polished steel, cream-colored face, the second hand still ticking faithfully. 700, Warren said. Sarah pulled the envelope from her bag and counted out the bills. Her fingers brushed the watch face as she lifted it, cool and familiar. She could almost feel her father's presence in the weight of it. Behind her there was a sound, not loud, just a breath, sharp and wrong. Sarah turned. The man in the army jacket was standing very still near the knife case, one hand pressed to his chest. His face had gone gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cold. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then his knees buckled, and he went down hard, skull cracking against the tile floor with a sound that made Sarah's stomach drop. Jesus Christ. Warren lurched forward, phone already in his hand. Sarah was already moving. She dropped her bag, the watch forgotten, and hit the floor beside the man in 3 strides. Her hands went to his neck, fingers searching for the carotid pulse. Nothing. She tilted his head back, checked his airway. Clear, but no breath moving. "Call 911, she said, voice sharp and automatic. Warren was frozen, phone halfway to his ear. We can't get involved. If he dies here, call them now." She ripped open his jacket, found the hem of his shirt, and yanked it up, exposing his chest. Pale skin, a few scars, one surgical, one that looked like shrapnel. She locked her fingers together, positioned her hands over his sternum, and started compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm took over. The same rhythm she'd performed 100 times in the ER. Fast, hard, unforgiving. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose and fell mechanically under her hands. But there was no life in it. Just the puppet work of her effort. "Don't touch him." Warren's voice was shrill now, panicked. "You're not on duty. If something happens." Sarah ignored him. 15, 16, 17. Her arms burned. Sweat dripped into her eyes. The man's face stayed gray, lips turning faintly blue. She bent down, sealed her mouth over his, and forced air into his lungs. Once, twice, then back to compressions. "Ma'am, you need to stop." Warren's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "We're not covered for this. The liability." "Shut up," Sarah snapped, not looking at him. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Her world had compressed to this. The floor under her knees, the hard plane of his chest under her palms, the count in her head. She was dimly aware of Warren standing uselessly behind the counter, of another customer who'd wandered in and immediately backed out when they saw what was happening. Come on. Come on. She could feel her father's watch ticking in her peripheral vision, still sitting on the counter. Time was everything and nothing. Every second without oxygen was brain cells dying, was the difference between recovery and vegetables, between life and a funeral. 30, breathe. 30, breathe. Her shoulders screamed. Her lower back was a knot of fire. The sirens grew louder, closer, and then a shudder, faint but real. His chest hitched on its own. A breath, ragged and thin, pulled itself into his lungs without her help. Sarah sat back on her heels, gasping. His eyes fluttered, unfocused and confused, and a small sound escaped his throat, part groan, part bewilderment. "Stay with me," she said, leaning over him, hand on his shoulder. "Paramedics are almost here. You're okay. Stay with me." His gaze found hers, struggling to focus. His lips moved, but no words came out. The shop door burst open, and 2 paramedics rushed in with a gurney and a medical kit, their movements brisk and professional. Sarah moved aside, giving them space, but staying close enough to brief them. "Sudden cardiac arrest," she said quickly. "No pulse, no respiration when I found him. Started CPR immediately. Approximately 4 minutes of compressions before he regained spontaneous breathing." The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, glanced at Sarah's badge, still hanging around her neck. "You're a nurse?" "ER," Sarah replied. "Mercy Ridge." The woman nodded and turned back to the patient, checking vitals, starting an IV line. Her partner was already getting him onto the gurney. "Did he say anything?" "No. Hasn't been conscious long enough." They worked fast. Within 90 seconds, they had him stabilized and were wheeling him toward the door. Sarah stood there, hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline, watching them load him into the ambulance. Warren was staring at her like she'd just set his shop on fire. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. Sarah turned to look at him, exhausted and still vibrating with the aftermath. "What? You weren't on duty. You're not covered. If he died, if his family sued." She cut him off with a look that could have stripped paint. A man was dying. That's not the point. That's the only point. She grabbed her bag and her father's watch from the counter and walked out into the cold without another word. The November air hit her like a slap, sharp and clarifying. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the ambulance disappear into the night, lights flashing red and blue against the dark buildings. Her hands were still shaking. She didn't know it yet, but nothing would ever be the same. By 8 the next morning, Sarah's phone was ringing. She surfaced from sleep like someone dragging themselves out of deep water, disoriented, heavy-limbed. The phone buzzed insistently on her nightstand. She grabbed it without looking at the screen. "Hello?" "Sarah, it's Jennifer. Jennifer Chen, head nurse in the ER, Sarah's direct supervisor, and one of the few people at Mercy Ridge who actually gave a damn about the staff." Sarah cleared her throat, voice rough. "Hey, what's up?" A pause. In that pause, Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "You need to come in," Jennifer said carefully. "HR wants to see you." "HR? Why?" "There's a video." Sarah sat up, suddenly very awake. "What video?" "From last night, at the pawn shop. Someone filmed you doing CPR." Jennifer's voice dropped. "It's everywhere, Sarah. 2 million views and climbing. People are calling you a hero." Sarah should have felt relief, maybe even pride. Instead, all she felt was dread. "Why does HR want to see me?" Another pause, longer this time. "Just come in," Jennifer said quietly, "as soon as you can." The line went dead. Sarah sat in the gray morning light filtering through her apartment's thin curtains, her father's watch ticking softly on the nightstand beside her. She'd saved a life last night, a stranger's life, and somehow that felt like a threat. She showered fast, threw on clean clothes, and was walking through the main entrance of Mercy Ridge Medical Center 40 minutes later. The hospital was a sprawling complex of concrete and glass, built in the 70s and expanded haphazardly ever since. Inside, it smelled like disinfectant and anxiety. Sarah took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where human resources lived in a cluster of beige offices, with motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. The receptionist, a young guy named Kevin, who usually smiled at her, wouldn't meet her eyes as he directed her to a conference room. The door was already open. Inside sat 3 people. Patricia Armstrong, the HR director, a woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and a face like a closed fist. Marcus Webb, the hospital's legal counsel, thin and pale, with wire-rimmed glasses. And Daniel Brennan, the chief operating officer, a man who'd spent more time in boardrooms than hospitals, and had the smooth, PR-friendly face to prove it. None of them stood when she entered. "Miss Mitchell," Patricia said, gesturing to an empty chair across the table, "please sit." Her hands were folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Patricia opened a folder in front of her and slid a printed screenshot across the table. It was a freeze frame from a video. Sarah on her knees, hands locked over the chest of the man from the pawn shop, her face intense with concentration. The timestamp read 11:58 p.m. "I assume you've seen this," Patricia said. "I just heard about it this morning. The video has been shared across multiple platforms," Marcus Webb said, his voice dry and precise. "Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Local news outlets have picked it up. By this afternoon, it'll probably be national." Sarah looked at the image. "Okay. In the video," Patricia continued, "you're clearly identifiable as a Mercy Ridge employee. Your badge is visible. You're wearing hospital scrubs." "I just got off shift," Sarah said carefully. "I stopped at the pawn shop on my way home." "You were off duty." Daniel Brennan said it wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you performed medical intervention on a civilian, without hospital authorization, without proper liability coverage, and while visibly representing this institution." The words landed like stones. Sarah felt her throat tighten. "A man was dying. I did what I was trained to do." "You exposed this hospital to significant legal risk," Patricia said flatly. "If that man had died, if his family had decided to sue, Mercy Ridge would have been implicated. Our insurance doesn't cover off-duty interventions performed while staff are identifiable as our employees." "He didn't die," Sarah said. "He's alive, because I helped him." Marcus Webb leaned forward slightly. "The outcome is irrelevant to the policy violation. The hospital has clear guidelines about off-duty conduct, particularly when it involves medical procedures that could create liability exposure." Sarah stared at him. "Are you serious right now?" "Ms. Mitchell," Patricia's voice was cold, "this is not a debate. You acted recklessly. You put this institution at risk. The optics alone." "Optics?" Sarah's voice came out harder than she intended. "A man had no pulse. He wasn't breathing. I had maybe 4 minutes before brain damage became irreversible. You want me to apologize for saving his life?" "We want you to understand the gravity of what you've done," Daniel Brennan said smoothly. "Mercy Ridge has a reputation to protect. We can't have employees acting without proper authorization and creating situations that reflect poorly on this institution." Sarah looked at each of them in turn. These people in their press suits and polished shoes, who'd probably never gotten their hands bloody, who'd never felt a stranger's last breath rattle out, and decided to fight for it anyway. "So what happens now?" she asked. Patricia closed the folder. "Effective immediately, your employment with Mercy Ridge Medical Center is terminated." The words hit like a punch to the solar plexus. "You're firing me?" "This is a termination with cause, based on policy violations," Marcus Webb clarified. "You'll receive your final paycheck minus any outstanding." "I saved someone's life," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "That's what you're firing me for." "You acted outside the scope of your employment," Patricia said. "You created a liability situation. You left us no choice." Sarah stood up so fast, her chair scraped backward. "You're choosing to fire a nurse for doing exactly what nurses are supposed to do." "This meeting is over," Patricia said, standing as well. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items from your locker. Your badge and access card need to be surrendered immediately." Sarah wanted to scream, wanted to flip the table, wanted to tell them all exactly what kind of cowards they were. Instead, she took a breath, pulled her badge off her neck, and set it on the table with a quiet click. "You should be ashamed," she said softly. None of them responded. A security guard was waiting outside the conference room. Tom Ramirez, a guy she'd chatted with 100 times during night shifts. He looked miserable. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said quietly as they walked toward the elevators. She didn't trust herself to answer. They rode down to the ground floor in silence. Tom escorted her to the locker room, stood outside while she gathered her things. A spare set of scrubs, some protein bars, a photo of her and her mother from before the cancer, a romance novel she'd been reading during breaks. Everything fit in a canvas tote bag. As they walked through the emergency department on the way out, Sarah saw her coworkers, nurses and doctors she'd worked alongside for years. Some glanced away quickly. A few offered sad smiles. Nobody spoke. Jennifer was standing near the nurses' station. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," but didn't approach. Sarah kept walking. Outside, the November sun was weak and distant. She stood on the sidewalk in front of Mercy Ridge Medical Center, the place that had been her purpose and identity for 5 years, and felt untethered. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Just saw the video. You're amazing." Another buzz. Another message from someone she didn't know. And another. Her phone started vibrating continuously as notifications flooded in. Texts, emails, social media alerts, strangers praising her, news outlets requesting interviews, people calling her a hero. None of it changed the fact that she was unemployed. Sarah silenced her phone and started walking. The apartment felt smaller when she got back, the walls closer together. She dropped her bag by the door and stood in the middle of her tiny living room, staring at nothing. Her phone was still blowing up, despite being on silent. She finally looked at it. The video had over 4 million views now. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. People sharing it, tagging friends, calling her brave and selfless. Someone had started a hashtag, #NurseSarah. A local news site had already published an article. Hospital fires nurse who saved man's life. Public outraged. Another headline. Viral hero loses job after life-saving CPR. The irony would have been funny if it didn't make her want to throw up. She set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, Ridgemont City spread out in all directions. Gray buildings, bare trees, cars moving through streets like blood through arteries. Somewhere out there, the man she'd saved was probably in a hospital bed recovering. He'd go back to his life, whatever it was. And she'd go back to what exactly? Her savings would cover maybe 2 months of rent, if she was careful. After that, she'd be scrambling for any job she could find. She was a nurse, but getting hired without a reference from her last employer would be nearly impossible. And if potential employers Googled her name, they'd find the video and the headlines and probably decide she was too much of a liability. Sarah sat down on her second-hand couch and put her head in her hands. The watch her father had worn for 30 years sat on the coffee table, ticking steadily. He'd been a firefighter, the kind of man who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. He would have done exactly what she did last night. No hesitation, no second thoughts. "I hope you'd be proud," she whispered to the empty room. The silence didn't answer. She almost didn't pick up. But the number was local, and something made her answer. "Hello? Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice, professional and unfamiliar. "Yeah. My name is Rachel Torres. I'm a producer with Channel 7 News. I wanted to talk to you about what happened at—" Sarah hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. She sent it to voicemail. By evening, there were 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. News vans had started parking on her street. She could see them from her window. Satellite dishes pointed at the sky like metal flowers. She closed the blinds and turned off all the lights. In the darkness, she sat on her couch and tried to figure out what came next. Tried to see a path forward that didn't end with eviction and ruin. Nothing came. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock on her door. Sarah froze. The reporters had probably figured out which apartment was hers. She stayed very still, hoping they'd give up. The knock came again, firmer this time. "Ms. Mitchell," a man's voice, deep, authoritative. "My name is Captain James Bridger. I need to speak with you about the man you saved." Sarah's heart kicked against her ribs. She stood slowly, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. 2 men stood in the hallway. One was maybe 50, with iron-gray hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wore a crisp navy dress uniform, ribbons and insignia gleaming even in the dim hallway light. Beside him stood a younger officer, also in uniform, with the rigid posture of someone who'd been standing at attention since birth. Sarah's hand hesitated on the deadbolt. "Who are you?" she called through the door. "Captain James Bridger, United States Navy," the older man replied. "This is Lieutenant Vasquez. We need 5 minutes of your time. It's urgent." She opened the door but left the chain on. "What's this about?" Captain Bridger's eyes were the color of winter steel. "The man you performed CPR on last night. His name is Lieutenant Commander Michael Harris. He's an active-duty Navy SEAL. What happened to him at that pawn shop is a matter of national security, and we need to talk to you about it." Sarah stared at him, her brain struggling to process the words. National security. "May we come in?" She closed the door, unhooked the chain, and opened it wide. The two officers stepped inside. Lieutenant Vasquez closed the door behind them and took a position near it, hands clasped behind his back. Captain Bridger remained standing in the center of Sarah's small living room, somehow making the space feel even smaller just by being there. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, "what I'm about to tell you is classified. You'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement before we proceed." Sarah's mouth was dry. "What?" Vasquez produced a folder from inside his jacket and handed it to her. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dense legal text with spaces for her signature at the bottom. Commander Harris was conducting sensitive off-grid operations when he suffered sudden cardiac arrest, Bridger continued. He was alone, unmonitored in civilian territory. If you hadn't intervened, he would have died. And with him would have died intelligence critical to ongoing national security operations. Sarah looked up from the paper. "Is he okay?" "He's alive." Bridger's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "Stable. Expected to make a full recovery." She felt something loosen in her chest, relief she hadn't let herself feel until this moment. "The CPR you administered saved his life," Bridger went on, "but it also created a situation. Commander Harris's presence in that location, his medical emergency, the attention it's drawn, all of this is problematic from an operational security standpoint." "I didn't know who he was," Sarah said quickly. "I still don't really. I just saw someone who needed help." "We know your actions were exemplary, but the video that's circulating, it's a security concern. Commander Harris's face is partially visible. We're working to have it scrubbed from social media, but the damage is already done in terms of his operational cover." Sarah sat down slowly. "So what do you want from me?" "Your silence." Bridger's voice was blunt. "You sign the NDA. You speak to no one about Commander Harris's identity or his service status. As far as the public is concerned, he was just a civilian who had a medical emergency. That's it." She looked at the paper again. Her hand was shaking slightly as she picked up the pen Vasquez offered. "What happens if I don't sign?" Bridger's expression didn't change. "Then you'll be legally compelled to sign through other channels, and it will be significantly less pleasant for everyone involved. I'm offering you the courtesy of cooperation." It wasn't really a choice. Sarah signed her name at the bottom of the page and handed it back. Vasquez took it, countersigned as a witness, and tucked it back into his jacket. "Thank you," Bridger said. For the first time, there was something almost human in his voice. "What you did took courage. Commander Harris is alive because you didn't hesitate. That matters." "It cost me my job," Sarah said quietly. Bridger's jaw tightened slightly. "We're aware. We've reviewed the circumstances of your termination, and we're addressing it through appropriate channels." Before she could ask what that meant, he was moving toward the door. Vasquez opened it, checked the hallway, and stepped out. Bridger paused at the threshold and looked back at her. "You did good work, Miss Mitchell. Don't let bureaucrats convince you otherwise." Then he was gone. Sarah stood in her apartment, door still open, staring at the empty hallway. From outside, Through the closed blinds, she could hear the murmur of reporters still camped on her street. She closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a long moment. Navy SEAL, National Security, Non-Disclosure Agreement. Her life had become something out of a movie. Except movies didn't usually involve getting fired and facing financial ruin. She was about to turn away from the door when she heard it, the low rumble of an engine outside. Different from the news vans, heavier. Sarah went to the window and carefully pulled the blind aside just enough to see. A black SUV with tinted windows had pulled up directly in front of her building. No government plates, no markings, but everything about it screamed official. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. Even from 3 stories up, even in the dim streetlight, Sarah recognized him. She'd seen his face on the news a dozen times. One of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy, a man who testified before Congress, whose name appeared in headlines about military operations and defense policy. He looked up for a moment, impossible though it should have been at this distance, and their eyes seemed to meet. Then he turned and walked toward the entrance of her building. Sarah's heart was hammering now. She moved away from the window, suddenly aware of how disheveled her apartment was, how disheveled she was. 3 sharp knocks on her door. She looked through the peephole. Admiral Keene stood in her hallway, alone, wearing civilian clothes, slacks and a dark coat, but carrying himself with unmistakable authority. Sarah opened the door. "Miss Mitchell," he said. His voice was quieter than she expected, measured and careful. "I apologize for the late hour. May I come in?" She stepped aside wordlessly. He entered, and she closed the door behind him. The Admiral glanced around her small apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture, the medical textbooks stacked on a shelf, her father's watch on the coffee table. Something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'll be brief," he said, turning to face her. "I know Captain Bridger was here. I know you signed the NDA. What I'm about to tell you goes beyond that conversation." Sarah waited, barely breathing. "Lieutenant Commander Michael Harris isn't just any SEAL," Keene continued. "He's part of a specialized unit, conducting operations that most people will never know about. The intelligence he carries, the missions he's involved in, they're critical to national security at the highest level. When he collapsed in that pawn shop, he was carrying information that, if compromised, could cost American lives." He paused, letting that sink in. "You didn't just save a man, Ms. Mitchell. You preserved a national asset. You protected intelligence that keeps this country safe. And you did it without hesitation, without knowing any of this, simply because it was the right thing to do." Sarah's throat was tight. "I'm just a nurse." "You're exactly the kind of person this country needs," Keene said. "Which is why what happened to you at Mercy Ridge is unacceptable." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I've spent the last 6 hours on the phone with people who can make things happen," the Admiral said. "Hospital administrators, board members, legal counsel, a few well-placed officials who owe me favors. By tomorrow morning, there will be consequences for the people who terminated you." Sarah felt dizzy. "I don't understand." "You will." Keene reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. He handed it to her. "This is a formal summons. Be at the Federal Building downtown at 0800 hours tomorrow morning. Conference room 4B. Don't be late." She took the envelope with numb fingers. "Why? What's going to happen?" "Justice," Keene said simply. He moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. "Your father was a firefighter, correct? Robert Mitchell?" Sarah's breath caught. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know about people who do the right thing when it costs them everything. He raised you well." Before she could respond, he was gone. Sarah stood alone in her apartment, holding the envelope, her father's watch ticking steadily in the background. Outside, the black SUV pulled away from the curb, and disappeared into the night. She opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of official letterhead bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. Summons for priority testimony. 2. Sarah E. Mitchell, R.E., Medical Intervention, LCDR Michael Harris. Date, tomorrow's date. Time, 0800 hours. Location, Federal Building, Ridgemont City, Conference Room 4B. This is an official summons requiring your presence to provide testimony regarding events of previous date. Failure to appear may result in legal consequences. This matter is classified and falls under previously signed NDA provisions. At the bottom, in handwriting that was sharp and precise. They made a mistake. Tomorrow we correct it. S.K. Sarah read it 3 times. Then she sat down on her couch, set the letter on the coffee table next to her father's watch, and tried to comprehend what was happening. Somewhere in the city, Michael Harris was recovering. Somewhere in their comfortable homes, the people who'd fired her were probably sleeping soundly. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just didn't know how yet. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat on her couch, watching the numbers on her phone's clock tick forward, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., while the letter from Admiral Keene rested on the coffee table like a live grenade. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the scene replay. The man collapsing, her hands on his chest, the hospital conference room. Patricia Armstrong's cold dismissal. At 6:30, she gave up pretending rest was possible and stepped into the shower. The water ran hot enough to hurt, steam filling the tiny bathroom until the mirror disappeared behind fog. She dressed carefully, dark slacks, a white blouse, the only blazer she owned that didn't have a coffee stain on the sleeve. Professional, composed, everything she didn't feel. Her father's watch went on her wrist. The weight of it steadied her. By 7:15, she was standing on the sidewalk outside her building. The news vans were still there. Reporters drinking coffee from thermoses, cameras ready. They spotted her immediately. Mitchell, can you comment on your termination? Sarah, how do you feel about the hospital's decision? Did you have any idea who you were saving? She kept her head down and walked past them without a word. Her car was parked 2 blocks away, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper, and a check engine light that had been on for 3 months. It started on the second try. The Federal Building sat in the heart of downtown Ridgemont City, a granite monolith of authority, 20 stories tall, with flags snapping in the November wind. Sarah had driven past it 1,000 times, but never been inside. She found parking in a garage across the street, and walked toward the entrance with her summons clutched in one hand. Security was tight. Metal detectors, bag searches, stern-faced guards who checked her ID 3 times before allowing her through. A young woman in a dark suit met her in the lobby. Ms. Mitchell? Professional smile, firm handshake. I'm Amanda Pierce, liaison officer, if you'll follow me. They took an elevator to the 14th floor. The hallway was all polished floors and government-issue artwork, landscapes of places Sarah had never been, mounted in identical frames. Amanda's heels clicked rhythmically as they walked. Do you know what this is about? Sarah asked. Amanda glanced at her. I'm just here to make sure you find the right room. Which wasn't an answer. Conference room 4B had double doors of dark wood with brass handles. Amanda opened them and stepped aside. Good luck, she said quietly. The room was larger than Sarah expected. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Windows along one wall offered a view of the city stretching toward Lake Michigan, gray water meeting gray sky at the horizon. 8 people were already seated. Admiral Keene sat at the head of the table in full dress uniform, ribbons and medals arrayed across his chest like armor. To his right was Captain Bridger, equally formal. A woman in her 60s, with silver hair and penetrating eyes, occupied the next seat. Sarah didn't recognize her, but the way she held herself suggested serious authority. Beside her sat two men in dark suits, who had federal agent written all over them. On the opposite side of the table were three people Sarah did recognize. Her stomach dropped. Patricia Armstrong from Hospital HR, looking significantly less confident than she had yesterday. Marcus Webb, the legal counsel, his face pinched and pale. And Daniel Brennan, the COO, staring at the table in front of him, as though hoping it would swallow him whole. "Ms. Mitchell," Admiral Keene said, standing, "please sit." There was an empty chair near the middle of the table. Sarah walked to it, on legs that felt disconnected from her body, and sat down slowly. "Let me introduce everyone," Keene continued. "You've met Captain Bridger. This is Director Helen Ashford from the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. Special Agents Carson and Mitchell from the FBI. And I believe you know the representatives from Mercy Ridge Medical Center." Patricia Armstrong wouldn't meet Sarah's eyes. "What's going on?" Sarah managed. "An inquiry," Director Ashford said. Her voice was crisp, authoritative, the kind of voice that had spent decades giving orders that people followed without question. "Ms. Mitchell, 2 days ago you performed emergency medical intervention that saved the life of Lieutenant Commander Michael Harris, a decorated Navy SEAL engaged in classified operations. Your actions were exemplary, and by all accounts executed with skill and professionalism." Sarah nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. "However," Ashford continued, "your subsequent termination by Mercy Ridge Medical Center raises significant concerns. When an individual performs a life-saving intervention on military personnel, particularly personnel engaged in sensitive operations, and is then punished for that intervention, it creates a chilling effect. It sends a message that helping members of our armed forces comes with professional consequences." Patricia shifted in her seat. Marcus Webb's jaw tightened. "This inquiry is to determine whether Mercy Ridge Medical Center's actions constitute retaliation against a civilian who assisted military personnel, and whether those actions violate federal protections." Ashford's gaze swung to the hospital representatives. "Ms. Armstrong, you terminated Ms. Mitchell's employment. Please explain the rationale." Patricia cleared her throat. "The decision was made based on hospital policy regarding off-duty conduct and liability exposure." Mitchell was wearing her hospital badge and scrubs, making her identifiable as a Mercy Ridge employee while performing unsanctioned medical procedures. "She performed CPR on a dying man," Captain Bridger interrupted, his voice hard as stone. "Are you suggesting that's unsanctioned?" "I'm suggesting that performing medical interventions while visibly representing our institution creates liability." "What liability?" Director Ashford cut in. "The man survived. He's recovering. Where's the liability?" Marcus Webb leaned forward. "With respect, Director, the concern isn't the outcome, but the potential exposure. If Commander Harris had died, if complications had arisen, if his family had pursued legal action." "His family is grateful," Admiral Keene said quietly, but the words cut through the room like a blade. "I spoke with Commander Harris's wife this morning. She wanted me to convey her thanks to Ms. Mitchell for ensuring her husband comes home." Silence fell. Daniel Brennan finally spoke, his voice careful. "Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mercy Ridge Medical Center has tremendous respect for our military. This wasn't about Commander Harris's service. This was simply a policy matter." "A policy that penalizes life-saving action," Ashford said flatly. "That's what we're here to examine, Mr. Brennan. Because from where I'm sitting, your hospital fired a nurse for doing exactly what nurses are trained to do: preserve human life in emergency situations." "She wasn't on duty," Patricia insisted. "She wasn't covered by our malpractice insurance. The hospital could have been exposed. To what? Special Agent Carson spoke for the first time, his voice deceptively mild. Good Samaritan laws in this state provide immunity for emergency medical assistance rendered in good faith. Ms. Mitchell's actions fall well within those protections. So what exactly was Mercy Ridge afraid of? Patricia's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Sarah sat very still, watching this unfold like a spectator at her own life. These people, these powerful, dangerous people, were fighting for her, defending her, holding her former employers accountable in ways she never could have alone. "Let me be clear about something," Admiral Keene said, and everyone at the table went quiet. "Commander Harris is one of the most highly trained operators in the United States military. He has skills and knowledge that are irreplaceable. The operations he's involved in save American lives. When he collapsed in that pawn shop, he was carrying information that, if lost, could have compromised ongoing missions and put service members at risk." He paused, letting that weight settle. Ms. Mitchell didn't know any of this. She saw a human being in cardiac arrest and responded. She used her training, her skill, her courage, and for that, you fired her. His gaze locked on Daniel Brennan. You fired her because you were more concerned with theoretical liability than actual human life. That's not a policy failure, Mr. Brennan. That's a moral failure. Daniel's face had gone red. "Admiral, with all due respect, I'm not finished." Keene's voice didn't rise, but it filled the room. Mercy Ridge Medical Center receives federal funding through Medicare and Medicaid. You participated federal programs for veteran care. You benefit from tax exemptions as a non-profit healthcare provider. All of that is contingent on operating in the public interest. Firing a nurse for saving a life is not in the public interest. We were following established protocols, Marcus Webb tried. "Your protocols are deficient," Director Ashford said, "and we're going to recommend a full review of your employment policies, particularly as they relate to emergency medical interventions by off-duty staff. The Department of Defense takes a dim view of institutions that discourage civilians from assisting military personnel in crisis situations." Patricia had gone pale. "This is unprecedented. You can't." "We absolutely can," Special Agent Mitchell said. "And we are." Sarah found her voice. "What does that mean?" Ashford turned to her, and something in her severe expression softened fractionally. "It means we're conducting a formal investigation into Mercy Ridge's employment practices. It means your termination is under federal scrutiny, and it means there will be consequences for the people who made that decision." "I don't want revenge," Sarah said quietly. "I just want my life back." "You'll get more than that," Keene promised. The meeting continued for another hour. Questions were asked, answers demanded, documents reviewed. Patricia, Marcus, and Daniel grew increasingly uncomfortable as the questioning intensified. Details emerged. The hospital had been aware the video was going viral before they called Sarah in. They'd made the termination decision in less than 20 minutes. They hadn't consulted with the nursing staff or the emergency department. They'd acted purely to protect institutional reputation. By the time it ended, Sarah's head was spinning. "Ms. Mitchell, you're free to go," Director Ashford said. "We'll be in touch regarding next steps." Sarah stood on shaky legs. Admiral Keene walked her to the door. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now?" Keene's expression was grim. "Now, we make sure they understand there are consequences for cowardice." She left the federal building in a daze, emerging into cold sunlight that felt surreal after the fluorescent intensity of the conference room. The reporters were waiting. They must have followed her downtown, but she walked past them without stopping. Her phone rang as she reached her car. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, then answered on impulse. "Miss Mitchell?" A woman's voice, warm and professional. "This is Senator Alicia Thornton's office. The senator would like to speak with you regarding your situation." Would you be available this afternoon? Sarah leaned against her car. I don't understand. Senator Thornton serves on the Armed Services Committee. She's taken an interest in your case. This would just be an informal conversation. Okay. Yes. Excellent. Someone will pick you up at 2 p.m. We'll send the address. The line went dead. Sarah sat in her car and stared at her phone. A senator wanted to talk to her. The Department of Defense was investigating her former employer. None of this felt real. She drove home in a fog, barely registering the traffic or the familiar streets. The news vans were still outside her building. She parked in the back lot and took the service entrance to avoid them. Inside her apartment, she made coffee she didn't drink and stood at her window, watching the city move below her. People going about their ordinary lives, commuting to jobs, grabbing lunch, existing in a world that made sense. Her world had become something else entirely. At exactly 2 p.m., a black sedan pulled up outside Sarah's building. The drive took 20 minutes through downtown Ridgemont to a high-rise with marble floors and security that rivaled the federal building. Sarah was led to the 18th floor, through a reception area with the senator's seal on the wall, into a corner office with windows overlooking the lake. Senator Alicia Thornton was 50-something, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that missed nothing. She stood from behind a massive desk and extended her hand. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Her grip was firm, confident. Please sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine, Sarah said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Thornton sat across from her, not behind the desk, a deliberate choice that made the conversation feel less formal. What happened to you is unacceptable. I've reviewed the details of your termination, spoken with Admiral Keene and Director Ashford, and I'm appalled by Mercy Ridge's response. Sarah nodded carefully. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure why you wanted to see me. Because what you did matters, Thornton said simply. You saved the life of a decorated service member who spent a decade protecting this country, and you were punished for it. That sends a terrible message to civilians about helping military personnel. I want to make sure that message is corrected loudly and publicly. Sarah's throat tightened. How? I'm introducing a resolution in the state legislature commending your actions. I'm also pushing for a review of Good Samaritan protections as they apply to medical professionals. And I'm making sure Mercy Ridge faces consequences for what they did to you. They're already being investigated by the federal government. Yes, but public opinion matters too. Thornton leaned forward. With your permission, I'd like to hold a press conference. You, me, and hopefully Admiral Keene, if he's willing. We tell your story. We make it clear that saving lives should be celebrated, not punished. We put pressure on Mercy Ridge to make this right. Sarah hesitated. I'm not looking for attention. I know, but sometimes attention is how we create change. Thornton's expression was earnest. You didn't ask for any of this, but you're in a position to make a difference. Not just for yourself, but for every medical professional who might hesitate to help someone because they're afraid of losing their job. Don't you want that to mean something? She did. Of course she did. Okay, Sarah said quietly. Thornton smiled. Good. We'll schedule it for tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., City Hall steps. I'll have my team coordinate everything. The press conference was chaos. Sarah stood behind the podium with Senator Thornton and Admiral Keene. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. She dressed in dark slacks and a blue blouse, professional but approachable, just as Thornton's team had advised. I'm not a hero, Sarah said into the microphone, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm just someone who saw another person in trouble and did what I was trained to do. But I shouldn't have lost my job for that. Nobody should. If this attention can help change things so that other medical professionals don't face the same retaliation, then maybe something good can come from all of this. The questions erupted. Sarah handled a few, kept her answers short. Thornton managed the rest with practiced ease. Keene said little, but his presence alone spoke volumes. The military standing with a civilian who'd saved one of their own. Afterward, as Sarah walked back to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Commander Harris is asking to meet you. Today, 2 p.m., Naval Medical Center, room 412. He'd like to thank you himself, Captain Bridger. Sarah read it twice. The man she'd saved wanted to meet her. The stranger whose life she'd fought for, while everyone told her to stop. She typed a response with trembling fingers. I'll be there. Room 412 was on the 4th floor. Sarah stood outside the door for a long moment, suddenly nervous, in a way she hadn't been at the press conference. Then, she knocked. Come in. She pushed the door open. Lieutenant Commander Michael Harris sat propped up in bed, IV lines running to his arm, monitors beeping softly beside him. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, with dark hair and sharp features that hadn't quite regained their color. His eyes were alert, though, focused and intelligent. Captain Bridger stood near the window. He nodded to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, Harris said, and started to sit up straighter. Don't, Sarah said quickly. You should rest. He smiled faintly. I've been resting for 2 days. I'm going crazy. He gestured to a chair. Please. Sarah sat. The room was quiet except for the monitors and the distant sound of hospital activity in the halls. I don't really know what to say, Harris began. Thank you seems inadequate for saving someone's life. You don't need to say anything, Sarah told him. I'm just glad you're okay. I'm alive because you didn't walk away. His gaze was steady, serious. Bridger told me what it cost you, your job, everything that's happened since. That's not your fault. Maybe not, but I wanted you to know what you did mattered, not just to me, but to the people I work with, the missions I'm part of. He paused. I can't tell you details, but there are things in motion right now that would have stopped if I died in that pawn shop. American lives that are safer because you kept me breathing. Sarah's throat was tight. I didn't know any of that. That's what makes it extraordinary, Bridger said from the window. You helped because help was needed. Nothing more complicated than that. Harris reached to the table beside his bed and picked up something small. He held it out to Sarah. A challenge coin, heavy and metallic, with the Navy SEAL trident on one side and words stamped on the other. Honor, courage, commitment. This is from my unit, he said. We don't give these out lightly. I want you to have it. Sarah took it carefully. The metal was warm from his hand. I can't accept this. You already did, Harris said with a slight smile. And if you try to give it back, I'll just have Bridger deliver it to your apartment at 3 in the morning. He's very good at that sort of thing. Despite everything, Sarah laughed. It felt good, breaking the tension. They talked for another 30 minutes. Harris asked about her nursing background, her father, what she planned to do next. She didn't have good answers for that last part, and he seemed to understand without her saying so. When she finally stood to leave, Harris caught her hand briefly. What they did to you is wrong, he said quietly. But it's going to get made right. I promise you that. Sarah drove home as the sun set over Lake Michigan, the challenge coin heavy in her pocket. She was almost to her building when her phone rang. Michael Torres, the reporter who'd covered her story from the beginning. I've got confirmation, he said without preamble. 9 cases over 7 years, all medical staff, all terminated after challenging hospital policies. Mercy Ridge has paid out over $2 million in settlements to keep people quiet. Sarah pulled over. Can you prove it? I've got documentation, internal emails, settlement agreements with confidentiality clauses. It's all there. I want to publish tomorrow. But I need a statement from you. Someone currently affected. Someone willing to go on record. She thought about David Chen and Sarah Blackwood, about all the others who'd been silenced and paid off and erased. "Do it," Sarah said. "Publish everything, and yes, I'll go on record." "Thank you," Torres said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "This is going to change things." He hung up. Sarah sat in her parked car as darkness fell around her, watching the lights of Ridgemont City blink on, one by one. Somewhere in those buildings, Patricia Armstrong and Marcus Webb and Daniel Brennan were probably having emergency meetings, calling lawyers, trying to figure out how to contain the damage. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Sarah's phone exploded. Torres's article dropped at 6 a.m. By 7, it was trending nationally. By 8, protesters were gathering outside Mercy Ridge Medical Center with signs reading, "Fire Patricia Armstrong," and "Patients over Policy." By 9, the hospital's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Sarah watched it all unfold from her apartment, her father's watch ticking steadily on her wrist. Her phone rang. Director Helen Ashford. "Ms. Mitchell, based on the Chronicle article, we're expanding our investigation. Mercy Ridge's federal funding is now under full review. If we find evidence of systematic retaliation, and Torres's reporting suggests we will, Mercy Ridge could lose millions in federal support. Medicare reimbursements, research grants, veteran care contracts, all of it." Sarah sat down heavily. What does that mean? It means they're going to fight back and lose. Ashford's voice was steady. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I know institutional corruption when I see it. And Mercy Ridge is rotting from the inside out." The call ended. 20 minutes later, another call. This one from a D.C. area code. "Mitchell, this is Colonel Andrea Vance, United States Army Medical Command. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Sarah's pulse quickened. "Yes." "Good. I'll be direct. We've been following your situation closely. The termination, the federal investigation, your background as an emergency nurse. We're impressed. More than that, we're interested." "Interested in what?" "In offering you a position. Emergency medical coordination for military trauma response units. You'd be working directly with special operations medical personnel, developing protocols for civilian-military medical cooperation in crisis situations. Civilian consultant role with the Department of Defense. GS-12 pay scale, full federal benefits, security clearance required." Sarah stood up from the couch, unable to sit still. "Why me?" "Because you demonstrated exactly the kind of decisive action we need. You didn't calculate liability. You saw someone dying, and you intervened with skill and precision." Colonel Vance paused. "And because what happened to you afterward exposes a critical gap in civilian medical response to military personnel emergencies. We want to close that gap. We want you to help us." Sarah walked to her window, phone pressed to her ear. Outside, the protesters at Mercy Ridge were still gathering. Inside this call, her entire future was being rewritten. "I need time to think." "You have 24 hours. After that, we move to our second candidate." The colonel's tone softened slightly. "Ms. Mitchell, opportunities like this don't come often. And based on what's happening at Mercy Ridge right now, I suspect you're going to need a new direction anyway. This is it." The line went dead. Sarah stood motionless, watching the city spread out below her. A federal job, working with military medical units, security clearance, everything she'd lost, replaced by something she'd never imagined. She pulled up Colonel Vance's email and typed a response before she could second-guess herself. "Colonel Vance, I accept your offer. When do I start? Sarah Mitchell." She hit send. The response came back in less than 5 minutes. "Ms. Mitchell, excellent. Preliminary security clearance process begins Monday. Welcome to the Defense Health Agency. Colonel Andrea Vance." Monday came faster than Sarah expected. But before she could leave Ridgemont City behind, there was one more thing she had to do. At 3 p.m. on Sunday, she walked into a coffee shop on Fletcher and 9th, the same street as the pawn shop, but a few blocks down. Patricia Armstrong was already there, sitting in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Sarah slid into the booth across from her without greeting. "Thank you for coming," Patricia said quietly. "You have 15 minutes. Start talking." Patricia took a breath. "I need you to understand something. What I did, firing you, it wasn't personal." "That's your opening? It wasn't personal?" "Please, just listen." Patricia's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "Mercy Ridge has been bleeding money for 3 years. The board was pushing us to cut costs anywhere we could. When that video went viral, Daniel panicked. He said we needed to distance ourselves immediately, before you said something that could implicate the hospital in liability. So you fired me to protect your image." "I fired you because I was told to. By Daniel, by the board, by the legal team." Patricia's eyes were desperate. "I argued against it. I told them it was wrong. But they overruled me." Sarah leaned forward. "You had a choice." "No, I really didn't." Patricia pulled out her phone and set it on the table. "I want to show you something." She opened an email. The sender was Daniel Brennan. The subject line read, "Mitchell situation, immediate action required." "Patricia, the Mitchell video is creating liability exposure we can't afford. Legal advises immediate termination to create distance between her actions and hospital liability. Board agrees. Execute termination tomorrow morning. Make it clean and final. No negotiation. DB." Sarah read it twice. "This doesn't absolve you." "I know, but I want you to understand. I was trapped too. If I'd refused, they would have fired me and found someone else to do it. At least if I handled it, I could try to make it less cruel." "Less cruel?" Sarah's voice rose. "You destroyed my career. You took away everything I'd worked for. You humiliated me in front of colleagues I'd spent 5 years building relationships with." Patricia's voice broke. "You're right. You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The apology hung in the air between them. Sarah studied the woman across from her, once powerful and untouchable, now broken and desperate. "There's something else," Patricia said quietly. "There was another incident, 2 weeks before yours, a surgical error that resulted in a patient death. The family was threatening to sue. Daniel told me to withdraw funds from a discretionary account to offer a settlement. $47,000. Get them to sign an NDA. Make it go away before it hit the news." Sarah felt cold. "Did you?" "The story never came out." Patricia's hands were shaking. "But I kept records, emails, documentation, because I knew eventually this would catch up to us." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because federal investigators are going through everything right now. They're going to find those transactions. They're going to ask questions. And when they do," Patricia looked directly at Sarah, "I need someone to know I didn't do this willingly, that I was following orders from people who had the power to destroy my career if I didn't comply." Sarah understood now. Patricia wasn't here to apologize. She was here to establish her defense, to position herself as a victim rather than an architect. "You want me to speak on your behalf. I want you to tell the truth, that the decisions came from above me, that I was executing policy I didn't agree with. Even if that's true, and I'm not convinced it is, you still made choices. You could have resigned. You could have gone public. You could have refused. And then what? Be unemployed? Blacklisted? Lose my house?" Patricia's desperation was palpable. "I have a daughter in college, a mortgage, bills. I couldn't just walk away." "I did," Sarah said quietly. "When they fired me, I lost everything, and I didn't have the luxury of choosing when or how." Patricia was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. I know what I did to you was wrong. But please, when the investigators talk to you, when they ask about the hospital's culture, just tell them the truth, that the real power was with Daniel and the board, that I was just following orders." Sarah stood up. "It's an excuse." She walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. That evening, Sarah's phone rang one last time. An unknown number with a Ridgemont area code. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Mitchell?" A woman's voice, older, unfamiliar. "My name is Helen Martinez. You don't know me, but I wanted to call and say thank you." Sarah frowned. "Thank you for what?" "My husband, Robert Martinez, he died at Mercy Ridge 2 years ago. Surgical complications. They told us it was unavoidable, that everything had been done correctly." Her voice shook slightly. "But after everything came out, after the federal investigation, we learned the truth. There had been errors. The hospital knew. They covered it up." Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry. The FBI contacted us yesterday. They're reopening the case. Because you didn't stay quiet when they tried to silence you. The truth about what happened to Robert is finally coming out." Tears burned behind Sarah's eyes. "I didn't know." "You couldn't have known. But you gave us a chance at justice we never would have had otherwise. So thank you for being brave, for not backing down, for making sure they can't do this to anyone else." The call ended. Sarah stood at her window, looking out at the city as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, Michael Harris was recovering. Somewhere, Helen Martinez was finally getting answers about her husband's death. Somewhere, 9 other people who'd been crushed by Mercy Ridge's machinery were watching their stories finally matter. She thought about her father, who'd never hesitated to run into danger, about the choice she'd made on a pawn shop floor, about everything that had followed. Her phone buzzed with one final message. "From Admiral Keene. Stand by. You're about to receive a very interesting offer." Sarah smiled slightly and set down her phone. She was ready. The call came at 8 the next morning. Sarah was already awake, sitting at her window, watching the city stir to life. "Miss Mitchell, this is Daniel Brennan's assistant at Mercy Ridge." The voice was tight, professional. "Mr. Brennan would like to schedule a meeting with you this afternoon. He's prepared to discuss reinstatement with full back pay and benefits." Sarah almost laughed. "Tell Mr. Brennan I'm not interested." "Ma'am, he's very insistent." "I'm sure he is, but I have a meeting with the Department of Defense in 2 hours. Have a nice day." She hung up. The news broke at noon. Sarah watched it unfold on her laptop, sitting cross-legged on her couch with coffee growing cold beside her. Breaking: Mercy Ridge Medical Center's CEO arrested on federal charges. Daniel Brennan had been taken into custody at his home that morning. Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, 8 counts total. The images showed him being led away in handcuffs, his perfectly tailored suit doing nothing to hide the defeat in his posture. Patricia Armstrong had been arrested too, though her charges were reduced. 6 counts. She'd flipped on Brennan within hours, handing over emails, financial records, recorded conversations. The insurance policy she'd built against the people who'd used her was paying off, just not in the way she'd hoped. 3 board members followed by evening. Marcus Webb resigned before they could arrest him and immediately began negotiating his own deal. By midnight, the total reached 7 people in custody, the largest healthcare fraud case in the state's history. Sarah's phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, well-wishers, lawyers offering representation, other hospitals offering jobs. She ignored almost all of them. But she answered when Admiral Keene called. "You watching?" he asked. "Hard not to." "Good, because this is just the beginning. The FBI's financial investigation is widening. They found evidence of Medicare fraud going back 5 years. Mercy Ridge is looking at hundreds of millions in fines. Bankruptcy protection won't save them from criminal liability." Sarah leaned back on her couch. "What about Patricia?" She cooperated. "She'll serve time. Less than Brennan, probably 4 to 5 years. But she participated in covering up patient deaths. The judge won't overlook that." Keene paused. "How do you feel about it?" Sarah thought about Helen Martinez, about David Chen and Sarah Blackwood and Marcus Pope. about all the people who'd been silenced and paid off and erased. I feel like justice took its time showing up. But it finally did. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in a federal courthouse and watched Daniel Brennan receive his sentence. 18 years. The judge's words echoed through the chamber. You built a culture of fear and corruption. You prioritized profit over patience. You silenced anyone who tried to do the right thing. This court will not tolerate such behavior. Patricia Armstrong's sentencing followed. 4 years, with credit for cooperation and time served. She didn't look at Sarah as she was led away. The board members received sentences ranging from 3 to 7 years. Marcus Webb got probation in exchange for his testimony. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Sarah made a brief statement. Justice has been served. The people responsible for years of corruption and cover-ups will face consequences. More importantly, Mercy Ridge Medical Center is being rebuilt with transparency and accountability. The patients and staff deserve nothing less. She didn't take questions, just walked to her car and drove away. 3 months later, Sarah stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing 200 military and civilian medical personnel. Behind her, a screen displayed the new emergency coordination protocols she'd spent months developing. The most important thing to remember, she said, is that in emergency situations, we're not military or civilian. We're medical professionals with one goal: preserving life. The protocols we're implementing remove barriers that have existed for decades. They protect both patients and the people trying to save them. After the presentation, a young Navy medic approached her. "Ma'am, I just want to say, I read about what happened to you. What you did for Commander Harris and how you fought back when they tried to silence you. It inspired me to challenge some unsafe practices in my unit. I almost didn't, because I was scared of retaliation. But I remembered your story, and I spoke up anyway. Things changed because I did." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "What's your name?" "Petty Officer Rebecca Torres." "Well, Petty Officer Torres, thank you for having the courage to speak up. That's how systems improve. People like you refusing to accept dangerous practices. People like you showed us how," Torres said simply. That evening, Sarah attended a small gathering at Michael Harris's home in Virginia. His wife, Jennifer, greeted her at the door with a warm hug. The kids, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, immediately started asking her questions about being a nurse. Dinner was casual, warm, filled with laughter. Admiral Keene was there, along with Captain Bridger and several of Harris's teammates. They told stories, teased each other, treated Sarah like family. After dinner, Harris pulled her aside onto the back deck. The Virginia night was mild, stars visible despite the city lights. "How are you really doing?" he asked. Sarah considered lying, then decided against it. "Honestly, better than I expected. The work is good, meaningful, and nights are easier now. I don't wake up replaying that pawn shop floor as often." "Good." Harris leaned against the railing. "You know, I still think about it. Waking up in that ambulance, being told someone fought for me when they had every reason to walk away. It changes you." "It changed me too." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "Jennifer and I talked," Harris said. "We want you to know, you're family now. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. That's not something we say lightly." "I don't know what to say." He smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Building things. Saving lives. Making sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." A year later, Sarah returned to Ridgemont City for the dedication of the Claire Donovan Emergency Medical Fund. Named, ironically, after the original protagonist of a story that had taken on a life of its own. The $2 million endowment would provide legal assistance and financial support to medical personnel who faced retaliation for prioritizing patient care. Sarah had insisted the fund be established in someone else's name. Any other name. But the board had overruled her. You're the reason it exists. It has to carry your name. So she stood on a small stage outside the newly restructured Ridgemont Community Hospital, formerly Mercy Ridge, and cut a ribbon, while cameras flashed and a small crowd applauded. Marissa Chen was there, grinning from the front row. Jennifer Chen had left Mercy Ridge months ago and was now working at Westdale Memorial, thriving in a healthy environment. She'd driven down for the ceremony. Afterward, they hugged tightly. "Look at you," Marissa said, Director of Civilian Military Medical Coordination, testifying before Congress, flying all over the country. Who even are you anymore? Same person who couldn't afford rent 2 years ago, Sarah said, laughing. Just with better business cards. They walked through the hospital together. It felt different now. Cleaner, brighter, though that might have been in Sarah's head. New leadership, new policies, federal oversight ensuring transparency. The corruption had been cut out like a tumor. Does it feel weird? Marissa asked, being back. A little, but mostly, Sarah paused, trying to find the right word. Hopeful. It feels hopeful. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her hotel room, looking out at the Ridgemont city skyline. Her father's watch ticked steadily on her wrist. Michael Harris's challenge coin sat on the nightstand beside her bed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it. Miss Mitchell, this is Helen Martinez. I just wanted you to know the settlement came through today. Justice for Robert, finally. Thank you for everything. I'll never forget what you did. Sarah smiled and typed back. I'll never forget what you said. Thank you for reminding me why this matters. She set down her phone and looked at her reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back at her was the same one who'd knelt on a pawn shop floor 2 years ago, counting compressions against time itself. Same face, same hands, same heart. But everything else had changed. She'd lost her job, found her purpose, been crushed by an institution, helped bring it down, started over in a new city, built something that would outlast her. All because she'd made one choice, one simple, impossible choice, to help a stranger when everyone told her to stop. Sarah picked up her father's watch and held it for a moment, feeling the familiar weight, the steady tick. I hope you'd be proud, she whispered, but it didn't need to. She knew. 6 months later, the Senate hearing room was packed. Sarah sat at the witness table, microphone angled toward her, a glass of water untouched at her elbow. Senators from both parties looked down from their elevated dais, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to genuinely interested. Senator Thornton sat at the center, her presence a quiet reassurance. Ms. Mitchell, Thornton began, you've been invited here today to testify on proposed legislation strengthening whistleblower protections for medical professionals. Can you tell us, in your own words, why this matters? Sarah leaned toward the microphone. 2 years ago, I performed CPR on a stranger in a pawn shop. He turned out to be a Navy SEAL, carrying intelligence that would have saved American lives. I didn't know any of that at the time. I just knew someone was dying. She paused, gathering herself. The hospital I worked for fired me the next day. They said I'd created liability exposure. They said I'd acted outside policy. They said I'd put them at risk. Never mind that a man was alive because of what I did. Never mind that he went home to his family. Never mind that I'd spent 5 years serving that hospital with everything I had. The room was silent. What happened to me wasn't unique. The investigation that followed revealed 9 other cases over 7 years. Nurses, doctors, technicians, all fired for challenging policies that prioritized profit over patients. All silenced, all erased. The hospital paid over $2 million in settlements to keep them quiet. Sarah looked directly at the senators. Medical professionals take an oath. We swear to put patients first. But when institutions punish us for keeping that oath, the oath becomes meaningless. Good people stop speaking up. Dangerous practices continue. Patients die. She held up a copy of the proposed legislation. This bill won't undo what happened to me. It won't give those 9 other people their careers back. It won't bring back the patients who died because hospitals covered up errors instead of fixing them. But it will tell every nurse, every doctor, every medical worker in this country, if you do the right thing, the law will protect you. You won't be destroyed for saving a life. Senator Thornton nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. That's exactly why we're here. After the hearing, Sarah walked out of the Senate office building into bright Washington sunlight. Her phone buzzed immediately. Michael Harris, saw you on C-SPAN. You were incredible. Dinner tonight to celebrate? Marissa Chen, just watched the live stream. Crying at my desk. So proud of you. Admiral Keene, well done. That's how you change the system. One testimony at a time. And one more. From an unknown number, but Sarah recognized the area code. Ms. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Torres, the Navy medic you met in San Diego. I just wanted you to know, I testified before my unit's safety board last week. Reported the unsafe practices I mentioned. They listened. They're making changes. I was scared, but I remembered what you said. Thank you for showing me how. Sarah smiled and typed her response. You showed yourself. I just reminded you it was possible. Keep going. She tucked her phone away and started walking. No destination in mind, just walking through the city, feeling the sun on her face, letting the weight of the day settle. She'd come so far from that pawn shop floor, from the termination meeting, from the dark months when she didn't know if she'd survive, from the moment Admiral Keene knocked on her door and told her everything was about to change. It had changed, all of it, and she'd changed with it. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the challenge coin Michael Harris had given her. The Navy SEAL trident gleamed in the sunlight. Honor, courage, commitment. She turned it over in her palm, then tucked it away again. Her father's watch ticked steadily on her wrist. Time still moving forward, still measuring out seconds and minutes and years. But the fear was gone. The feeling that she was alone, that the system would crush her, that doing the right thing meant losing everything. All of it had burned away in the fire of the past 2 years. What remained was something harder, stronger, more durable. Sarah Mitchell kept walking, disappearing into the Washington crowd, a woman who'd saved a life and refused to apologize for it. A woman who discovered that sometimes the right choice costs everything, and that everything was just the beginning. The end. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that courage matters. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And remember, doing the right thing is never the wrong choice, even when it costs you everything.